total control of the mind is written in that text. Adolf Hitler, he said, okay, goal's taking care of lulling the populace to sleep, making them think that everything's cool, no problems, that we're not anything except doing exactly what they want us to do. And everything that we do militarily, they'll think it's their idea, that they're protecting us. And he proceeded then to say, some of these children that were considered chosen ones of these families that had been so horribly abused had developed some extraordinary physical and psychological abilities. They had photographic memories. Photographic memories. Something we all would love to have. They had 44 times, in most cases, visual acuity improvement. That's practically like having eyes in the back of your head. So Hitler thought, wow, special forces. I can use this, I can have the most elite fighting force on earth. But more than anything else, these people could be given suggestions, or sometimes called as programs, under the influence of hypnosis and certain drug compounds. And these programs could be triggered out into action by any established means of triggers. Just like a computer, when you access a program, you've got to know how to get past or get into your computer through a code, a set of codes. Well, there are also a set of codes, keys, and triggers in which to access someone's memory of a certain event that has been compartmentalized due to trauma or due to drugs. Adolf Hitler was a very brilliant sociopath. Sociopaths make the best leaders because they seem so dynamic, so believable, and so utterly focused. But what you see is not what you're getting. And so it is with society today. MK Ultra evolved, and I always said, Germany didn't lose war. They just moved the guys that were organizing it over to the United States and Canada. Had it not been for one brave individual in Canada who had the political clout to go up against the United States government, most of what I'm going to be telling you, and most of what we have in those packets back there, as far as Freedom of Information Act documentation, would not exist. Because in 1976, a Senator Frank Church from the United States, began investigating the CIA's abuses of certain individuals based on reports he was getting from a politician in Canada about a particular hospital by a particular fellow by the name of Ewing Cameron, who unfortunately was the founder of the American Psychiatric Association, who was a CIA officer and an operative and working for the government. Whether he was working for your government is still a matter of contention, but he was working for the CIA. This man was literally torturing people who walked through the front door of a facility, mental health facility in Montreal, who hadn't been preconditioned at birth, who were coming in there for things like simple depression or some sort of chemical imbalance in their brain, normal stuff for you to go see a psychiatrist for and be treated, and they were coming out as vegetables, or people severely damaged as far as their ability to project who they were. They were suffering from dissociative disorders. In other words, amnestic blocks. Well, the whole thing was brought to task, and in 1977, the 95th U.S. Congress met, and the CIA, in typical fashion, never admitted any wrongdoing, but did finally offer some pittance of compensation to families and some of the survivors of these hideous experiments done in Canada. The Central Intelligence Agency at that time was well out of control because they were threatened in the early 60s by a president. That president was immediately assassinated. His name was John Kennedy. It is well known among the people who think conspiracies don't even exist. And by the way, the government prosecutes more people for conspiracy than anything else, and then they say, don't believe in conspiracy stuff. We're not talking about conspiracy here, folks. We're talking about a criminal organization. It's wide open. The streets in my country are flooded with drugs. Our television, our motion pictures are flooded with misinformation, trauma. They're desensitizing the population and have been for several generations so that we will accept this new world order, this United Nations, this effort to protect us and what's left of remnants of our families or our personal possessions. They're destabilizing us through what is known as psychological warfare. We are all victims of it. But going back to Hitler's idea with taking some of these chosen ones, the children of these multi-generationally abused families who had some of these extraordinary talents, he was going to educate them in the finest schools all over the world. He was also going to place them in positions of extreme power, like the president and prime minister of each and every region or country. And he would be invisibly pulling their strings. One man would be in control of the world. That was his fantasy. That fantasy was nothing new. Nero had the fantasy. Lots of folks have had it. And thank goodness at the very end, something dreadful happens and the whole thing goes. But all the good people, they got caught up in while this evil was being perpetuated, right under the noses of good people like you and me and everybody else. We don't see anything until we wake up. Has reached proportions where there are actually people in positions of authority that are beginning to do something. The rich folks are getting burned. They're getting mad. When the rich folks like the DuPonts get mad, this is good. This is good. When whistleblowers working for the government find that they actually do have a spine, and they actually find out if they'll keep their mouth shut about harassment and not get out there for some badge of courage and say, well, here's what the government's done to me just so I could be here tonight. If anybody gets up in front of you all and tells you that, you're probably getting a lot of misinformation, or you're getting somebody with a tremendous ego, or you're getting somebody who works for the government, most likely. Because if you are a whistleblower, the first lesson you know is keep your mouth shut only about arrests. Because if it don't work, they don't do it. And it doesn't work unless the people perpetuate it by intimidating other people so they won't become whistleblowers. I'm going to tell you quite honestly that we don't have any problems. It's not because we're misinformation officers. And it's not because I'm oblivious. It's because in the beginning, when they harassed the living hell out of us, I refused to talk about it. Some whistleblowers say they can't stand it anymore, so they wind up in prisons to destroy their own credibility. There's a lot of very honest people with a lot of integrity who are locked up on bogus charges or sometimes deliberate criminal acts just so they can have the safety of having their credibility destroyed because they think they can blow the whistle from the inside. People don't believe them. I have a hard time believing anybody in prison. I have a real hard time because information into the people's heads without getting myself killed. Cathy O'Brien and I have been doing this for long enough to where now the bad guys' window of opportunity is pretty much closed. If I die natural causes, there's not very many people in this room would believe it. There's not very many people in the United States that you could even begin to convince. I have received not death threats from the bad guys. I have received demands that I quit riding my motorcycles, that I quit fooling around with experimental aircraft, and I stop smoking immediately. They're actually worried about my health. I think that's so considerate. Since what they did to Cathy O'Brien and her daughter, who is literally a political prisoner, goes beyond the imagination of even that of Adolf Hitler. Child abuse is rampant around the world. Rampant. If I ask, which I would of course do, but if I ask the people to raise their hands in this audience that were abused sexually as a child by an adult, the numbers would scare the living heck out of those that weren't. And a lot of the people that don't hold up their hands didn't even know it was sexual abuse. They thought it was affection. And so they wouldn't even identify it that way. The point is, sexual abuse in itself has a profound effect on human psyche. But when you destroy one's ego or their perception of themselves, who they are, you have stripped them of their free will, their ability to critically analyze, or that part of their brain that helps them make rational, logical decisions is literally put on hold. No, I do not harbor the belief that these characters, creeps, whatever you want to call them, are stealing your soul. As a matter of fact, soul literally takes flight, as I perceive it, and as most theologians perceive it. It actually takes flight from the body when the body is being just literally desecrated. I didn't find that Cathy O'Brien's soul had been touched. And believe you me, after working with all of these clients who've been abused by various military operations, these are legitimate survivors who are institutionalized in mental hospitals all over the world where we travel. And when I interface with them and work with them and train the doctors on really what not to do, like, how does that make you feel? The patients taught me something. They're people. And some of them recovered are some of the biggest jerks you ever knew in your life. They would have been jerks anyway. The poor things just had been abused under my control. That jerk part of their personality, I believe, is relative to their soul or to their soul expression. I hope it's soul expression. But once they're given free will, they're not very nice people, some of them. Some of them are like Cathy O'Brien, who I'm very prejudiced towards. I think probably is as close to being perfect as anybody I've ever met. But she is an individual. She has free thought. She and I are together 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm a very reclusive person. I was hired by the government because I could keep a secret. I was also hired by the government because I stayed to myself. This is totally alien to my personality to be out here in front of you people telling secrets that I was sworn to protect and that I feel or felt at that time I had an obligation to humanity for it to be released through our medical academia in a way in which doctors could evolve slowly instead of this information all coming out at one time being piled on. But this operation that I belong to, called the International Society for the Study of Dissociation, is a group of doctors who are, for the most part, very concerned on helping these people recover. Because in 1980, there were 200 cases that had been diagnosed of this disorder worldwide throughout history. In 1990, there were 250,000 in the United States and Canada. By 1995, 2.5 million people had been diagnosed. And it is roughly estimated by both the American Psychiatric and American Psychological Association and the Canadian Psychological Associations that represents 1 out of 11 people walking around. This is a frightening statistic. It's one that you need to know about, and it's one that we hope that we can impart as much information while we're in your area today and tomorrow. So at this point, without further ado, I would like to introduce a person who has truly survived hell, a person who I respect, and a person whom I believe you'll find to be as normal as whatever normal means. But more than that, a person who is connected with her spirituality and the person who rescued me, Cathy O'Brien.
I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out here tonight to arm yourselves with knowledge about a tool, a little known invisible tool that is being covertly used to usher in what Adolf Hitler and George Bush termed New World Order, and that's mind control. I want to thank Wes Mann for bringing Mark and I out here to give us this opportunity to enlighten all of you to this information that's been suppressed for far too long. The information on mind control is truth that you have a right to know and a need to know. Because knowledge is our only defense against mind control. These criminals that are in control of our country and in control of our world operate on the philosophy that secret knowledge equals power. By telling their secrets, their power is eroding. I know that I'm extremely fortunate to have survived my MK Ultra mind control victimization. To reach this point in telling what I witnessed behind the scenes of this New World Order effort. As a White House, Pentagon level, CIA mind controlled slave, I was totally robotic. I had no capacity for free thought. I had no conscious awareness whatsoever and was actually functioning on a subconscious level. And on a subconscious level, the subconscious mind has no ability to reason, to question, or to comprehend. The subconscious mind just readily accepts information. And I was totally robotic, forced to carry out criminal covert operations that were absolutely, totally against my will. But under mind control, I learned that without free thought, there's no free will. And without that God-given free will, there's no soul expression. It wasn't until Mark rescued my daughter Kelly and I in 1988. And I went through his expert and loving deprogramming process and regained control of my mind and my memories once again, that I was able to remember all those secrets that I was supposed to forget. Our good friend David Icke wisely stated that knowledge is neither good nor bad. It's who has control of the information that makes the difference. And the information on mind control can be used for good because what they know about how our brains work, how the mind-brain function actually occurs, and what all the components of our thinking processes are. When good people have that information, I am really excited at the prospect of the evolvement, the giant leap of evolvement that humanity is going to experience. Because when we consider the fact that we only use 10% of our brain, what does the rest of our brain hold? What possibilities are there for us? Those criminals who are manipulating all of us have insightful information pertaining to how the mind-brain function works in absolute detail. And once we have that information and use it for good, I don't think we're going to even need doctors anymore. The healing capacities of the brain, the power of the mind is so strong that the possibilities are very exciting for what can happen for all of us once we have this information. But so far, this information has been suppressed from all of us. It's been suppressed through the mental health communities. It's been suppressed by the government. The government I'm referring to are the New World Order elite, those who are hell-bent on world domination through mind control of the masses. They have kept this information up from us so that they can manipulate us all. It's time that the moral majority of the United States, Canada, and the world had this information. I feel so fortunate to have survived to reach this point. And now that I'm in control of my own mind and have free will, it's my choice to provide you with the facts of exactly what mind control entails. Because once you have the understanding of the components of mind control, then you will be armed against it. It's as though there's an evolution in the brain when that awareness of exactly what you're supposed to watch out for is in place. You're able to protect yourself against mind manipulation of all forms. My trauma-based, mind-controlled, total, absolute robotic victimization was extreme. And although the information is horrific, it's certainly no more horrific than what we see happening in society today. There's turmoil globally as people are beginning to wake up from the controls that they've been under for so long. The details in our book, Transformation of America, have been provided so that you can have the details and the information that you have a right to know. The names that I named in Transformation of America have been named not so I can say that, oh, I had sex with so-and-so at the White House or whatever. That's not the point. The point is giving you the names so that you know who these criminals are, so that we can all be far more effective in our ongoing effort to take back our respective countries and to take back our world. There certainly wasn't any glamour to my White House Pentagon level victimization. I missed the glamour part. The trauma-based mind control that I was exposed to did not allow for any of that. Yet the information is provided and the details that are in there are in themselves evidence. Because the details provide you with insight into mind control and insight to this new world order mechanism that's controlling us all. I'd like to provide an understanding of mind control tonight predicated on my experience. Even though my experience was extreme, there's certainly a sliding scale to mind control that will apply to everyone from all walks of life. from the kind of mind manipulation that we get through our controlled medias to the mind control, the low-level mind control that's going on with backwoods witchcraft that's proliferating, the Satanism, occultism that's proliferating worldwide. Military, intelligence, paramilitary, mercenary type operations, special forces operations, all the way to kind that's using espionage and the kind that I was exposed to as a CIA mind control slave. I was born in 1957 in Muskegon, Michigan, to a multi-generational incest-based family. My father had been sexually abused as a child, my mother had been sexually abused as a child, and they were sexually abusing me. The fact that I had been so horribly abused as far back as I can remember, and I have heard my father often brag that he was substituting his penis for my mother's nipple while I was still an infant, which confused my sexuality and put it into an area of my brain that was akin to survival. It was like breathing and eating to me. And even though I couldn't comprehend that what my father was doing was morally wrong, I experienced the pain and the suffocation of his abuse just the same. As a result, I suffered from what's known today as dissociative identity disorder. Dissociative identity disorder was formerly termed multiple personality disorder, but I'm so glad they changed the name because that is not an accurate description of what dissociative identity disorder is. I didn't have multiple personalities. In fact, I had less than one, because the personality that I would have developed was absolutely shattered before I had a chance to become myself. Dissociative identity disorder is professionally defined as the mind's sane defense to trauma too horrible to comprehend. It's termed the mind's sane defense because what actually happens is there's a compartmentalization of memory that occurs within the brain, where the neuron pathways actually physically shut down and compartmentalize in a little area of the brain memory of that traumatic event, so that the rest of the mind can function normally as though nothing had happened. This is what makes dissociative identity disorder difficult to identify and makes mind control difficult to see. It's an invisible menace that's been unleashed on our society by a handful of criminals, just a small handful. And it's inexcusable that good people allow this small handful of criminals to continue their reign of terror and reign of power on all of us. This criminal faction of government, this criminal faction in control of the U.S. government, was very much interested in targeting children like myself who suffered from dissociative identity disorder for absolute mind control, because they considered that this compartmentalization of memory would be ideal for compartmentalizing government secrets. And behind these amnesic barriers of this compartmentalized memory is a photographic memory, because it's a natural process and a natural function of the brain to photographically record events surrounding trauma. Therefore, they knew that behind the amnesic barriers, messages, certain orders would be photographically recalled when accessed. Additionally, when a person suffers from dissociative identity disorder, they develop 44 times visual acuity. 44 times visual acuity is what often creates that wide-eyed look of people that have been so horribly traumatized. It's as though they have eyes in the back of their head and they're trying to absorb everything from all around them so that they can see that horrible trauma before it happens and somehow defend themselves against it. This 44 times visual acuity means that they can see 44 times better than the average person. This was certainly targeted for mercenary and paramilitary operations, military intelligence, and espionage, because when a person has that kind of pinpoint vision, they'd be far more likely to hit their targets when they're shooting. Additionally, compartmentalized memory. If memory is being compartmentalized into different areas of the brain and a person's functioning through this compartmentalized memory, they don't remember what happened before. And therefore, they don't know to be tired. They don't know to be worn out. They don't know to be exhausted. And therefore, they feel just as fresh as if they hadn't done anything yet. So physical endurance is increased dramatically with dissociative identity disorder. My father had a 6th grade education and was earning his living as a worm digger, and supplemented the family income with child pornography that he was making of me and distributing it through the local Michigan Mafia child pornography ring. Now, these criminal politicians that were interested in New World Order controls through mind control of the masses were looking for children like myself within the child pornography ring, because any child that was subjected to child pornography would be so horribly traumatized that they would be suffering from dissociative identity disorder. Therefore, they actually sanctioned this criminal operation so that they could target children like myself. That's how I became a chosen one, or a prime candidate for the CIA's MKUltra mind control project. My father was caught sending child pornography, a bestiality film of me and my Uncle Sam's dog Buster, through the U.S. mails. This perverse film was confiscated. And my father was approached. I was just 6 years old at the time. And my father was approached and told that he could receive immunity from prosecution if he would agree to sell me into the project. Of course my father agreed. Not only that, but he was so excited because he felt like the government actually condoned child abuse, that the government actually condoned incest. So much so that he went on to have 5 more children to raise in the project. There were 7 of us in all. My brothers and sisters are far less fortunate than I am. Because under MKUltra mind control, there's no capacity to even think to escape. It takes someone with the fortitude and the intelligence of Mark Phillips to come in and rescue them. They're waiting for the day that people wake up to the reality of mind control and stop not only their abuse, but the abuse of so many other mind control survivors that are out there. They remain to date under my father's control. Once my father agreed to sell me into this MKUltra project, the local Michigan politician who was actually sanctioning the criminal activity of this child pornography ring came to my father and explained to him how to raise me according to government specifications. This politician was Gerald Ford. This is the same Gerald Ford that went on to become the first unelected president of the United States. This is the same Gerald Ford that headed the Warren Commission that covered up the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Gerald Ford explained to my father the components of mind control, the severe psychological and physical traumas that I was exposed to caused my conscious mind to take flight, leaving my subconscious mind open to manipulation, which, when combined with a regimen of sleep, food, and water deprivation, left my mind wide open to their controls. One of the first things that my father was instructed to do was to take me to Mackinac Island, Michigan, where the Michigan governor's mansion is located. At that time, the governor of Michigan was George Romney. George Romney was very much aware of MKUltra mind control and very much interested in implementing mind control on a grand scale. It was at Mackinac Island, Michigan, that I was prostituted to various politicians to fulfill their perversions, because they never dreamed that one day I would be able to think, to tell about those perversions, about their pedophile perversions with a little child. One politician that I met in Mackinac Island, Michigan, in the summer of 1968, was then Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. Pierre Trudeau was very much interested in implementing mind control of the masses because Pierre Trudeau is a professed Jesuit. Jesuits are the intelligence arm of the Catholic Vatican. And there was a criminal faction of the Jesuits that was very much interested in the Catholic Church being the one world church in the New World Order. And they firmly believed in mind control. This is not to say that all Catholics are bad. That's absurd. It's not to say that all CIA is bad or that all American politicians or Canadian politicians are bad. There's good and bad in everything. There was a very definite criminal faction whose agenda was to implement this New World Order, this world dominance effort. And Pierre Trudeau was one who was very much interested in this aspect. He knew about the effects of trauma on the human mind. It was at Mackinac Island, Michigan, that I heard conversations between he and Governor Romney pertaining to mind control. And although I was just a little child and couldn't comprehend it, nor could I comprehend it because of my victimization and the trauma that I was enduring at the time, it was through the deprogramming process and writing out my memories of exactly what I heard verbatim, photographically, as recorded in my brain, that I began to understand what those conversations entailed. The conversations pertain to how the Catholics had long since learned the effects of trauma on the human mind through such things as the Spanish Inquisition and the Crusaders and the events that were happening long, long ago. But they had kept a record of the effects of the trauma and how the human mind responded to it. That information, combined with what the CIA had gleaned from the Hitler-Himmler research, merged together to make a very powerful form of absolute robotic mind control. Now, this was back in 1968. Since then, technology has advanced tremendously, as has mind control capabilities. But the trauma-based mind control that I was exposed to involved Catholic traumas. I was being raised in the Catholic Church. We belonged to Muskegon St. Francis de Sales Church, which was heavily involved in MKUltra activities. The Jesuit influence in the church was working in conjunction with the CIA and the U.S. government and the Canadian government for mind control purposes. By the time I made my first communion, I was 13 years old. I was exposed to a ritual afterwards, an occult ritual that they termed the right to remain silent. That's spelled R-I-T-E, as in ritual. This blood ritual that I endured was so horrific, so absolutely mind-blowing, that my conscious mind took flight and my subconscious mind was wide open to manipulation. It was at that point that I lost control of my mind. Up until that point, I had that switching mechanism in my brain where the various compartments would actually open up as needed to be able to withstand the traumas that I was being exposed to. For example, when my father came in to sexually abuse me, the part of me that had dealt with the sexual abuse in the past, the neuron pathways of my brain actually physically opened up so that the part of me that dealt with that could deal with it again and again and again as needed. If I was exposed to child pornography, the part of my brain that knew how to deal with that child pornography would actually open up to deal with it again and again as needed. When I saw my father at the dinner table, or we were just doing routine things around the house, I didn't think of the sexual abuse that I'd been exposed to. It was compartmentalized. It was often another part of my brain. But when he unzipped his pants, the part of my brain that dealt with it opened up. And that was a natural switching mechanism that it goes with dissociative identity disorder and is the mind's sane defense to trauma too horrible to comprehend. With this right to remain silent through hypnotic language, or NLP, the neuro-linguistic programming, expert mind manipulation was put into place where they took control of the switching mechanisms through a series of hypnotic codes, keys, and triggers, and or hand signals. They could access the different compartments of my brain. They could program those different compartments to carry out those certain government operations or to fulfill certain perversions according to their controls. I no longer had the capacity to switch to deal with various abuses on my own. Up until that point, I had been able to have free thought on occasion. I remember thinking how I wish that there was some place in the world where people didn't abuse each other. I was hoping that I could have 10 children of my own. I wanted 10. It was just a good Catholic number, I don't know. But I wanted to have 10 children, all my own to raise, because I knew those 10 children would never be abused and I could take good care of them and just love them. Because my whole environment was just saturated with incest, child abuse, mind control. And yet I'd had that capacity to hope until that right to remain silent. Until the right to remain silent, I could make decisions, taking from the different perceptions that were formulated in the different compartments of my brain. And I'd hear my voice arguing back and forth in my head in order to make a decision. And I'd pull all these different perceptions together and actually make some kind of a decision until the right to remain silent. With the right to remain silent, I lost all capacity for free thought. I never had a free thought anymore. I had no ability to even hope for a place where people acted in love. With that right to remain silent, I no longer heard my voice arguing in my head. From that point on, all I could hear was the voices of my abusers instructing me on exactly what it was that I was supposed to do. At Mackinac Island, Michigan, I was subjected to another ritual, a sexual abuse ritual, that was to induct me into what is known as the Order of the Rose. The Order of the Rose is the global elite that are working on New World Order controls. It's not another boys' club. It's not another one of those Masonic Illuminati secret organizations like that. It's not structured that way. What it is instead is a signifier, a rose signifier to those in the know that they were a part of New World Order efforts. It's a mindset, it's a way of thinking, it's an agenda, it's something that they believe in, which certainly is foreign to our way of thinking, but nevertheless, it's the way they think, and they signaled each other through this rose. And it was under the Order of the Rose that I was forced to operate during my White House Pentagon level mind control victimization. Pierre Trudeau is a noted member of the Order of the Rose, as is Governor Romney. And Pierre Trudeau was part of the sexual abuse, the trauma, and used his expertise of manipulating minds to control my mind and to thrust me into this Order of the Rose. My exposure to Pierre Trudeau was very limited in numbers of times that I saw him, but nevertheless, the impact that he had on my victimization was very significant. After the right to remain silent, it was at Mackinac Island, Michigan, that I met who had become my owner under MK Ultra Mind Control. That was U.S. Senator Robert C. Byrd. Senator Byrd has been in office as long as I've been alive, and he remains in office today. He's a very powerful and influential senator from the state of West Virginia, a Democrat. You'll notice that the names I name don't have anything to do with political party lines. For example, Gerald Ford is a Republican, Byrd is a Democrat. Because not only were there not party lines, but this wasn't even about United States constitutional values and the betterment of American ideals. Instead, I didn't even know that there was a border between our two countries. I didn't know there was a Canadian-U.S. border. I didn't perceive it that way because I was back and forth across it, and I witnessed and experienced the relationship that Pierre Trudeau had with the political leaders of the United States. And it was all the same agenda. It was all for the same outcome and the same goal. Senator Byrd held the purse strings of the United States for many years as head of the Senate Appropriations Committee. He decided what money would be designated where, for what purposes. And his purposes, of course, were New World Order. It was because of Senator Byrd's position, when he became my owner in this project, that my father became extremely wealthy through military contracts that were appropriated his way on his 6th grade education because of having sold me to Senator Byrd. Senator Byrd, as my owner, directed my activities. He decided where I would be taken when, which criminal covert operations I was forced to participate in, what government leaders I would be prostituted to, and where I would be taken, which military and NASA installations I would be taken to for sophisticated mind control programming. Senator Byrd directed my activities throughout my victimization. It was Senator Byrd who ordered that I be sent to Muskegon Catholic Central High School, which was heavily involved in the initial groundwork for what would later be known as Global Education 2000. Global Education 2000 was being implemented worldwide, and the Catholic CIA influence in Muskegon Catholic Central was ideal for a test ground for this kind of activity because I was subjected to occult ritual in the school chapel, which left my mind photographic to absorb the information in the school system. I got straight A's. I did real good in the school, but I didn't have any ability to critically use any of the information that I had. I had no creativity with it. I couldn't critically analyze it. I just robotically accepted it in, just like some kind of a tape recorder, some kind of a machine. It was while I was at Muskegon Catholic Central that Gerald Ford went into the office of president. This was absolutely devastating to me. It was like the last straw. It was what just completely locked me into mind control and locked me into the idea that indeed I had no place to run and no place to hide, as they'd conditioned me to believe. After all, I felt like, who could I turn to? I couldn't turn to my parents. I couldn't turn to my church. I couldn't turn to my school. I couldn't turn to local politicians, and now I couldn't even turn to the President of the United States. I truly believed that the whole world was involved in mind control. Senator Byrd later ordered that I be sent to the backwoods of Louisiana under the control of my first mind control handler, a guy named Wayne Cox. Wayne Cox was involved in the country music industry, but he was also working paramilitary operations, mercenary operations, under the direction of Louisiana Senator J. Bennett Johnston. At that time, J. Bennett Johnston had been running mercenaries who had been programmed from childhood, as I had been, and conditioned from childhood under MK Ultra, to carry out these secret operations at that time in South America. These guys had been targeted to carry out their mercenary operations for that pinpoint accuracy in their shooting and their physical endurance and all of the other superhuman qualities of dissociative identity disorder. Whereas with my victimization, since it was my sexuality that had been confused and enhanced from infancy, I was used primarily as a sex slave. As a sex slave, I was prostituted to the various government leaders. I was prostituted to drug lords. And the perversions that occurred with these particular politicians were being covertly filmed from little cameras in the ceiling, because these criminals don't trust each other. Instead, they blackmailed each other through these perverse films and for other means that they had to control them. Because in essence, they all had each other by the perversion, and they were able to maintain each other that way. So I was used primarily as a sex slave, delivering messages to and from these government leaders that I was prostituted to in the process, plus distributing drugs throughout the United States and Canada. In Louisiana, Wayne Cox was an occult serial killer who was being used to provide a trauma base for mind control for these certain mercenary operations under J. Bennett Johnston's direction. Senator Byrd wanted me to be exposed to more occult traumatization to create a whole bunch of those little compartments in my mind so that I could be programmed in all kinds of various ways for the different operations that I'd be forced to carry out during the Reagan-Bush administration. Once my mind had been prepared, it was 1978, and I was exposed to J. Bennett Johnston at that time. Senator Johnston's intelligence level was just really high up there. It was beyond my realm to comprehend, especially under mind control, but it was just incomprehensible intelligence. It really seemed alien to me. And he told me, he said, "I'm an alien." I was part of the Philadelphia experiment, and when that ship disappeared, it came back a spaceship. Now, this air-water reversal is in keeping with a NASA theme that is used heavily. Nevertheless, when he told me that this ship had come back a spaceship, he showed me through his General Dynamics office a top-secret stealth fighter. In 1978, this was still classified information. It wasn't available in the newspapers for sure. It wasn't available in college textbooks or anything that I was exposed to. So when I saw this triangular ship, it looked alien to me. J. Bennett Johnston wanted me to believe that he was an alien in order that I feel totally helpless, as though what was happening to me was beyond my realm to affect. The same way that the occult traumatizations that I experienced with these demons and devils, and in fact these were people, but nevertheless they're telling us demons and devils to make me feel like there was nothing I could do to affect it. We all need to be aware that these criminals know how we think. They know that we're all limited in our thought by our own perceptions and our own life experiences. These criminals are at least 25 years ahead of us technologically and with information. What's it going to do to all of us when we see what technology that they do have if they reveal it to us today? Consider what's happened in the last 25 years, from the advent of microwave ovens to the computerization, and they've had all this technology to advance their technology through this next 25 years. So when I say they're 25 years ahead of us, that is an understatement.